Good morning to all of you and welcome to the event or workshop or webinar. Lots of interesting contents. The topic is sustainable nutrition and zero deforestation goal. So how to reconcile healthy nutrition, defense of land, and most especially also to give food to the billions of people on the earth. They will need more and more food. I'm Carlo Alberto Pratesi. I teach at Roma Tre University a marketing, innovation, sustainability course. So the topic of palm oil is very interesting, intriguing for me because it's a controversial topic and the positions are not always aligned, and today we're going to have the opportunity to listen to the top experts on sustainability and palm oil to understand what the real challenges are and also the fake news about this topic. But before starting the discussion and introducing the experts, the floor goes to Mauro Fontana, the president of the Italian Union for Sustainable Palm Oil, for a quick welcome address. Over to you, Mauro. Thank you so much. Good morning and welcome to all of you to the first of the two seminars of Unione Italiana di Palma Sostenibile as part of the sustainable activities festival. So we will be talking about how we can achieve SDGs, in particular as regards zero deforestation and sustainable nutrition. Tomorrow instead we'll talk about certification and communication. The Unione Italiana di Palma Sostenibile was established in 2015 thanks to the processors or users of palm oil and trade associations in the food and oil and fat production sectors. Three main goals: disseminate correct information based upon technical and scientific evidence of the characteristics and benefits of sustainable palm oil, to promote the use of sustainable palm oil by Italian companies, and three, involve NGOs, enterprises, institutions and citizens in the knowledge of the benefits contributed by sustainable palm oil in its promotion and countering fake news that still go against it. The epoch-making challenge that the world is trying to uptake, even though it's very late, is to solve at the same time two themes that require conflicting interventions. The food security and food safety to tackle demographic growth and undernutrition with the need to produce more food and use more land, more productive ones, and then the sustainability of the ASG aspects and countering climate change. And this requires, conflicting actions. So we need to come up with a balancing of the two needs. And so we have to develop sustainable nutrition, and as we will see today, sustainable palm oil, thanks to its productivity and sustainability, is one of the main drivers for this. So this webinar is going to be a key point to clarify this aspect. Thank you and enjoy the webinar. Thank you, Mauro. So you've already introduced the topics we're going to discuss. So all I have to do is to add that for me and for all of us, we have to teach, not just communicate, the themes of food sustainability and agriculture sustainability, and palm oil is a very interesting case history for the academia and science people, because on this topic we've seen so many aspects, and we put together the market communication and production, as well as challenges relating to biodiversity and the environment. So many disciplines have been put together. It's an arena in which the various positions have clashed, and alas, in these months we have bigger problems compared to palm oil. But you may remember that some years ago palm oil was in the top news, so we don't want to forget this important ingredient, and we have to continue to educate. Education should be science-based, not just based upon hearsay or ideologies or inconsistent positions. So that's why we've put on board some of the top experts who can help us. Look, so like Mauro Fontana said, the theme is nutrition, amount of food produced, environmental impact, the market, and I would add biodiversity and land. So to kick off the webinar, let's start from the very reason why we cultivate palm oil, which is nutrition. Nutrition will have to be increasingly consistent with environmental sustainability, and to do that we've invited Professor Eric Maillard. He's a scientist. You'll get to know him in a moment. He has beautiful slides. He has a well-established experience in the tropical areas. When we talk about palm oil, we talk about Indonesia and Malaysia. He is director of Borneo Futures in Brunei Darussalam, professor in the University of Queensland and also in Canterbury in the UK, and he also chairs the Oil Crops Task Force of the IUCN. So he's a person who already sees the problem from many different viewpoints. He has several publications, and then in the chat box we will give you the link to his publications, the most recent ones. But I would say that we should listen to him. He has interesting information to give to us, most especially as regards the false myths which somehow concern palm oil. Many of us think we know the problem. More often than not, we only know false myths that can be busted based upon science. Thank you, Eric. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Carlo, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Maillard, and let me just share my screen. Interesting, hold on. I have lost my, there we are. Put that in presentation mode. Can you confirm that this is all okay?
Yes, Eric,
okay,
perfect.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, my name is Eric Maillard. I've worked for much of the past 30 years in Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia. My background is in wildlife conservation. I've done a lot of work on orangutan conservation. And of course, we all know that there has been a long link between oil palm deforestation and threats to orangutan. So for the past 15 to 20 years, I've been doing a lot of work on the management and understanding of palm oil, but also in the broader context of other oil crops. And I'll be presenting the findings from a review paper that we published earlier this year in the journal Frontiers in Nutrition, titled Dietary Fats, Human Nutrition, and the Environment, and really seeking to understand what does this term that everyone uses, this term sustainability, what does that really mean? It's often used, but the reality on the ground of what sustainability really means remains poorly understood. With regards to oils and fats, it's very clear that as human beings, we need fat. I'm not a nutritionist, but nutritionists generally tell me that between 25 and 30% of our daily energy needs come from oils and fats. Those are needed because some of those are essential to us. Now, it's very obvious that some of us have consumed way too much fat, and therefore there's a major problem in the world of people that are overweight or obese, about nearly 2 billion people. That's a significant portion of total humanity. On the other side of the coin, there's a lot of people, nearly 1 billion, that are undernourished. And the point I'll be making is that supplies of fats to people will remain important and probably become increasingly important going into the future. And this relates to the fact that, of course, human populations are predicted to grow further from a current near 8 billion people to probably more than 10 billion people around 2070. You can see in the graph that there are sort of variations between different predictions, but there will be more people, and more people means a higher demand for fat and oil. And we need to decide how we're going to produce that fat. One way of looking at it is where that fat is needed and what people are generally consuming. So the map on the top left-hand side, it's a very simple map that shows the main source of fat for consumption. You can see, for example, in Russia and Kazakhstan, the light yellow color is it's mostly sunflower oil. In Australia and Canada, it is mostly rapeseed oil. In the United States and Mexico and Brazil and China, it is mostly soybean oil. And then, of course, in the tropics, it's mostly palm oil or groundnut oil, peanut oil. So there's a lot of variation across the world. And it's important to look at where these fats are consumed and what their contribution is to people's daily energy needs. The map on the bottom left and the map on the top right show you areas of undernourishment, basically people that are hungry, and food insecurity, where the more orange colors show the areas of the greatest needs. So in the tropics, and especially Central Africa, the Congo, a great need for additional energy intake, and that spatially coincides with areas of production for peanuts and palm oil. The flip side of the coin is the parts of the world where we consume too much fats, and by and large they're overlapping, very roughly speaking, with some of the temperate zone oils such as rapeseed, soybean, and sunflower. Something to do with where fats are consumed and where they are produced. And an important part of that is that especially undernourished people require affordable diets. If you're on an average income of $1 per day, which is the current cutoff by the World Bank for poverty, it's around $1. It makes a big difference whether you source your energy needs from fats that are cheap. In the graph, it shows they're below 20 cents per day, or from protein-rich foods, dairy, or starch, which are more expensive. So people don't just need food, but they need affordable food as well. And I wouldn't suggest that everyone just eat fats. Of course, we need to get people first through an energy sufficient diet, then a nutrient adequate diet, and ultimately a healthy diet that includes foods from several food groups and that has a greater diversity within food groups. But that's a long way for nearly 1 billion people. And the production of fats now and in the future are going to contribute to that. So that is the human health aspects of fat consumption. And again, I didn't have the time to dig deeper into health aspects of different types of oil. It is very complicated. Now we're getting to the planetary health of fat production. And I've done that, or I've shown that in maps again, where the map on the top left shows the main production of vegetable oil crops, with maize and soybean being produced in large parts of America, China, rapeseed in Canada and Europe, and then again in the tropics you have coconut oil, peanut oil, and palm oil. And then this is also, so you basically have, if you're looking for fats, you have the choice between vegetable fats and animal fats. Vegetable fats are produced directly by oil crops, like the crops I just mentioned. Animal fats are produced indirectly through crops, for example, by pigs feeding on soy and thereby producing pig fat, or beef, cattle feeding on grass and thereby producing tallow or beef fats. Now, all these production areas of fats are linked to what are called planetary boundaries. These are points where there's great concern if we pass that boundary, we're seriously undermining planetary health. And there's more than these 4 that are shown in these maps here, but they have to do with things like nitrogen flows. There's clearly too much nitrogen being brought through agriculture in the lands of Europe, the United States, India, and China, that are overlapping with some of the temperate oil crops. So we often see the environmental problem of oil production, vegetable oil production, in the light of palm oil expansion in tropical forest area. But I always make the point that palm oil relatively needs low areas to produce the same amount of oil compared to crops like soy and rapeseed that are grown in areas that already have big problems with nitrogen flow, also big problems with biosphere integrity, because large parts of the Americas, Africa, Australia, and Asia have already been converted to agriculture. Therefore, we're losing the natural ecosystems. On the land system change side, so basically where are the changes currently happening, the finger is clearly pointed at the tropics, in the Amazon in South America, in the Congo in Africa, and in islands, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And there is an aspect of freshwater use as well. So we need to kind of look at these oils and different ways of producing oils that can meet the future demand of oils and fats by looking at the production areas and their environmental impacts, keeping in mind that for poor people that are undernourished, it is really important that we supply them with affordable fats and oils. So as a scientist, I always tell you, it's very complex and we need to know more. We're scratching our heads in confusion. But these are essential questions that we need to learn to answer. How are we going to meet the future demand for oils and fats with the best impact, environmental positive impact on our health, and with the lowest environmental impacts in terms of land use and nitrogen flows and so on. So in conclusion, I think this requires more work. As scientists, we always tell you that we need more research, but the research is ongoing. We're mapping the global areas of soybean and rapeseed and sunflower and coconut and oil palm to have a better understanding of relative impacts on environments. We also work with nutritionists to get a better understanding of what this means for our health. And the key message is that win-wins are not always possible. Sometimes you need to sacrifice a little bit to gain something else. And we need that clarity of what that means for consumers, retailers, and people that are making the political decisions. With that, I thank you very much, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Very interesting. We've understood that there are some legends on palm oil that we have to argue about. We've understood that we have to produce more vegetable oil that's required for the nutrition of many people. We don't have to eliminate fats from nutrition. It's an essential component, and quite obviously these large amounts have to be made with the lowest possible impact on the environment. The system is very complex. Usually we prefer to simplify. Most especially journalists and politicians love to come up with the silver bullet, one magic solution that solves the problem. And we've said in the past that eliminating palm oil would fix the environmental issue. Eric, just one question, but a very, very, very fast answer. Politicians, I mean, the decision makers or policymakers, according to you, are they aware today that a complex topic like nutrition and fats in nutrition cannot be solved with simple solutions? Do they know that we have to study in order to better understand, or are they still aiming for the quick fixes?
Good question. I think this is changing. I think if you look 10 years back in time, politicians were ready to jump to quick conclusions with regards to production of vegetable oils and oils and fats. More and more, and I see this reflected in the media, there seems to be an understanding that there are no real simple answers to these complex questions. And media now don't just write about palm oil being a cause of deforestation in Indonesia and Malaysia, but media write about palm oil and soybean and rapeseed and sunflower and other major crops, each of which have their impacts. And I think there's a growing understanding that we need to look in this complexity and really start to find out what the ideal optimal solutions are to meeting environmental needs and as well as human health needs. And that is not a simple issue.
Grazie, Eric. Since it's not simple, we have to study. We've understood that the environmental impact is a condition for sustainability, so we can no longer consider it as just a nice to have, need to have productions that don't destroy the land and the environment and the society in which they're made. For this reason, we have involved more researchers. In this case, we have two in particular, who will kind of give us an idea of the social environmental impact of a production like that of palm oil. So, the first to whom I give the floor is Cinzia Kyriakou of the Euro-Mediterranean Center for Climate Change. She's a co-author of a paper that puts palm oil as a contributor for a sustainable development, and the title of the paper will be Palm Oil's Contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So not only it's not a problem, but it can be the solution. So Cinzia, some minutes to you to tell us real quick what the evidence is that you've found by studying this theme. Thank you, Carlo Alberto. Thank you to all of you. Yes, as was said, palm oil was at the center of the public, scientific and political debate. And in terms of the environment and nutrition, Professor Mayer and Dr. Fontana told us. We'll see that in the following presentations, but I imagine that we'll hear more about what happens in terms of nutrition. Anyway, in reality, the discussion was focused on the environmental and nutritional aspects, but not so much on social and economic aspects. So there was a gap in terms of arguments in these two areas. So we've done this review together with Matteo Bellotta and other colleagues of CMCC. So Matteo will tell us what the findings are of this. And in the meantime, I also wanted to announce that we are concluding one more piece of work. It's not yet ready. That examines environmental impacts, but not only of palm oil, but also of its possible replacements. And an answer to this criticism against palm oil of the last few years took two avenues. In some cases, most especially in the agro-food area, some producers have eliminated palm oil and replaced it with other oils, rapeseed, sunflower, and soybean. In other cases, we've had an increase in the awareness and consciousness, and some have chosen to continue to use palm oil, but sustainable palm oil. So, this is a preview of, this piece of work. We're about to conclude. We've evaluated environmental impacts, so emissions of GHGs through LCA and changes in land use if we replace palm oil with other oils or if we use sustainable palm oil, including the risk of deforestation. And according to me, this is a very hot topic. And in particular, if we consider an alternative, i.e. sunflower seed oil, which has as the main production area, as shown by Professor Mayer, is Ukraine and Russia. So if we consider the current war that involves these countries, we will certainly have an issue in terms of sourcing of sunflower seed oil. So if we consider palm oil and its alternatives, we have to take this into account as a possible impact. So again, we will shortly publish this piece of work. Thank you. Now, yes, The floor goes to my colleague. Thank you, Cinzia. Just one thing. Every choice has its trade-off. Every solution has pros and cons. So it's difficult for scientists to understand what the best combination is. In general, there's no just one solution. But here again, diversity is the best solution. So probably we don't have to focus on one production only. Everybody has understood that sunflower seed oil is vulnerable because it comes from places that are now involved in the war. Matteo Bellotta, CMCC. Over to you. You have very few minutes, but off you go. Okay, I'll immediately share my screen since my colleague has already introduced the topic that we co-present. So, like Cinzia said, we've prepared this review that concerned 82 publications. Starting from 2010 up until 2020, we have tried to see how these publications have judged the impact of the production of palm oil with 8 indicators that are very much focused on social and economic aspects. So poverty, hunger, health and well-being, quality, gender equality, impact on hygiene and water, as well as economic growth and the reduction of inequalities. Let's say that the focus was shifted to not just the analysis of these 82 publications, but to what's inside the publications. And we have focused on sustainability schemes and their implementation and just how they have impacted these 8 SDGs. Let's say that the analysis for every one of these 8 SDGs has been carried out, and we've tried to graphically translate all of this to give you an idea of the ranking of these impacts. As you can see in the chart, on one axis you have the years 2010 to 2020, and on the other axis the good or bad impacts. It should be pointed out that the distance between the spheres and the size of the spheres is the number of publications on one SDG, but the distance, as I was saying, does not result in a bigger or better, in a more positive or more negative impact of the publications. It's just a graphic trick to put on the same line the publications that concern one specific SDG. So, taking a look at the chart, you can see that the publications relating to SDG 8, that is in light purple, relates to economic growth. And you can see that the size of the spheres indicates that the publications were numerous and spread over the decade as compared to the same color at the bottom of the chart. In this case, the size is bigger and there is a higher distribution. It means that a certain economic growth was highlighted by the publications. For example, if we consider this SDG, it's also decent work, not just economic growth. And the negative impacts at the bottom of the chart are lower, and they relate to the second part of the SDG, i.e. decent work. Because this SDG puts together two themes that at times are conflicting one with the other. So we have seen that there's been a certain economic growth domestically as well as in terms of local population, but the second part of the SDG, that of decent work, shows some criticalities. Likewise, SDG 1, reduction of poverty, well, we've seen that there has not been a reduction of poverty, but rather there's been a decrease in the growth rates of poverty. So in absolute terms, maybe we have not seen a reduction, but just a reduction in growth. And then as regards to the positive impacts of the production of palm oil, they've been highlighted here. And likewise, we can see that SDG 10 relating to the reduction of inequalities shows more spheres at the bottom, negative impacts, and there are a few positive impacts at the top of the chart with respect to this SDG. And so the analysis of the publications has shown that there's not been a reduction in conflicts, like, for example, between local communities and big business, or conflicts between men and women. So from this point of view, we can say that there are more negative than positive impacts from the adoption of palm oil. And likewise, as regards gender, SDG 5, the condition of women, has suffered from negative impacts as regards the palm oil supply chain. Based upon the same criteria, we have tried to analyze only the publications that referred to sustainability schemes and sustainability proper. With respect to that, we can see that there has been one finding. The application of sustainability schemes kind of mitigates somehow the negative impacts of the production of palm oil. And as regards SDG 5 and 10 on inequalities, we can see that there has been a slight improvement with respect to the condition of women, as well as with respect to the reduction of inequalities, even though a lot needs to be done on this front because there are so many negative impacts from the point of view of inequalities and conflicts, most especially between communities and big business with respect to the production of palm oil. We've seen a big concentration in the second part of the chart. So after 2015, the SDGs were established around 2015, so probably the focus on social themes has increased over the last years, and also the implementation of sustainability schemes probably has been enhanced during the last part of the last decade. Matteo, we are running short of time. Yes, I'm almost done. Can you please just tell us, we've understood, cost benefits. So support to the economy, decrease in poverty rates, improvement in access to food, and there are some criticalities, most especially with respect to access to land and land ownership, and a lesser decrease in the inequalities in communities and gender-wise as well. We have found work conditions that are not so decent, but sustainability schemes have improved the situation and they are seen as a possible solution for these criticalities. Okay, thanks a lot. This is the scientific paper that you can find online. Yes, it's interesting that some criticalities are not the ones that are much talked about, and other criticalities that are so emphasized are not criticalities. This is to remember that we should start from data, not opinions. Thank you so much. For sure, some of you will read the abstract, if not the whole paper, because what you said is not so intuitive. So we need to go through the paper. Your research has been very useful. So now, let us dig into nutrition, because it has been said since the beginning, and Eric said that oils are useful for nutrition. They're not tolerated, they're necessary. So that's a type of information people don't have. We look for no fat or low fat on shelves, but we believe that we don't need fats. No way. It's the opposite. So we have to dig into this with Sebastiano Banni, full professor of physiology at the Cagliari University and coordinator of a PhD on these topics of nutrition, metabolism, and the like. He's the best person to explain to us what the role of fats is in diet and why they are not bad if correctly used. Quite obviously, we have to have the right balance and the right quality of fats. Over to you, Sebastiano. Thank you so much for your presentation. First of all, I'd like to thank the previous speakers because they've partly touched on the topics I'm gonna delve into. First thing first, let's take a look at what sustainability is. When we talk about sustainable nutrition, what do we mean? We can say that it's a delicate balance between having to find adequate food for all and at the same time preserve the environment, biodiversity, and local resources. So this is a delicate balance, and it includes these two concepts which are per se difficult to put in practice in real life. And when we talk about adequate nutrients, we have seen that the best way is personalized nutrition. That is to say, a nutrition that doesn't focus on the foods, but rather on the interaction between the food and several other factors like metabolism, genetics, microbiome. So, personalized nutrition. And these two factors can be put together with the so-called food diversity, which allows for more biodiversity as well as for a better ability to personalize nutrition. Sure, it's not simple when it comes to food diversity, because we don't realize, but in our diet we introduce over 26,000 substances or molecules, whereas in general databases or epidemiological studies they talk about 1,000 substances at the most. But there is a dark matter, as it is called, when it comes to nutrition, because there are so many molecules and possible interactions between these molecules that we still don't know. But for sure, there is a benefit with a diversified diet. This is one of the many papers that have been published on that. But there again, there is a side effect. It has been seen that this is more expensive. And this is why, in principle, from the point of view of public health, governments should incentivize a diversified diet, but they should also include policies to promote this type of diet, which is not so popular. Quite obviously, they prefer less expensive policies like free from. But this has no background and no scientific evidence. The fact that a diverse diet is also good for sustainability and the environment, this is shown in this paper on Nature. This makes it very, very clear, and you can see that the so-called flexitarian diet, which is as diverse as possible, not excluding any type of food, and this is very important, is the one that is most sustainable environmentally wise. And here you can see that as compared to a regular diet based upon the guidelines, which, by the way, don't take account of many factors. the flexitarian is more sustainable. And this flexitarian diet, so as diverse as possible, is easy to personalize. A lot easier to personalize, taking account of the requirements of the individual through a number of parameters that can be considered. And so these diverse diets, like the flexitarian diet, do not exclude any type of element, any type of nutrient, which instead is the case with many policies. Like we've talked about palmitic acid, and many guidelines, as a matter of fact, even say that we should take as least as possible, but they forget what the nutritional role is of this fatty acid, which is seen as the devil. But we have to remember that we introduce nutrients, not poisons. And then also the balance between nutrients is so important. But unless they are contaminated, for sure, foods are nutritionally valid. Let's talk about the palmitic acid that has been seen as the devil. It has a very bad reputation in the literature, but people forget that it is the most widespread fatty acid, one of the most widespread fatty acids in our body. And it is also, like in a 70-kilo man, more or less like me, there are 3.5 kilograms of palmitic acid. So when we introduce roughly 20 grams per day, it is a drop in a sea. And this is the reason why we, even though we introduced the palmitic acid, the values of palmitic acid don't really change in our body. And amongst other things, it is also present in all foods, because since it is an important fatty acid, and we will see its many physiological functions, quite obviously it is present and important for plant products and for animals. So it is present in all foods in different concentrations, so much so that it would be impossible to have a diet free from palmitic acid. But there are many physiological properties of this fatty acid. One fundamental component of the membrane, so it's fundamental that it is present in our cell membranes. It is important as a surfactant for the lung alveoli, so it's fundamental for breathing. It's important for regulating many cell membrane proteins, and it is the precursor of bioactive molecules like PEA. So it plays a fundamental role, and this is the reason why the palmitic acid in our body doesn't only come from diet, but we can produce it endogenously, like I said a moment ago, because from glucose we can form palmitic acid. And this is an extremely useful system for us, because under certain conditions, when we cannot have enough palmitic acid, there is this metabolic pathway. A classical case is the fetus. The palmitic acid from the mother does not enter the placenta satisfactorily, and so what happens? That the fetus doesn't have the palmitic acid from the mother, so the fetus has developed this very high ability to produce it from glucose through this de novo lipogenesis. So there is a strong induction of this metabolic pathway so that the fetus can grow and have an adequate amount of palmitic acid. And then at birth, there is a metabolic transition whereby glucose is used most especially for brain development, and palmitic acid, which is always fundamental. In this case, it comes from breast milk. Sebastiano, we need your final sentence. 1 minute to go. So tell us, so what? Okay, so in a nutshell, this is the end, because in adults, this de novo lipogenesis is very low, but it can be enhanced. And we have recent findings showing that the palmitic acid in the diet can block this pathway and be favorable in certain conditions. So in a nutshell, this means that in an environment that is not sustainable and when there is little diversity in diet, this is a symptom of malnutrition. Instead, food diversity with an optimal balance amongst the various nutrients allow us to go for personalized nutrition, and this means sustainable nutrition as well as healthy nutrition. That's all. Thank you, Sebastiano. Apologies, but I'm a timekeeper. Anyway, we invite all participants to dig deeper into this topic by reading your paper. So, palm oil and palmitic acid are not bad, and they're even necessary. This is very useful. And then you've confirmed once more that we need a diversified diet. So diversity is the leitmotif of our human activities. Eliminating things is never good. We have to balance things, and we have to have the right nutrition. But to be balanced, we have to have a diversified territory. We have to maintain biodiversity, and deforestation has resulted out of the extraordinary success of palm oil. People don't understand that since palm oil is so extraordinary, the supply has increased in proportion with demand, and this has had adverse impacts, including deforestation in particular. So on how to manage this topic and how to ensure that the healthy food doesn't result in an unhealthy environment. Now we have Niels, CEO and founder of Satelligence, and he has studied the latest findings on two countries that are the leaders in the production of palm oil, Indonesia and Malaysia. So we'll ask him to clarify this aspect relating to the environmental impact of the production of palm oil. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Buongiorno. I am Niels. To help the industry. Am I back on?
We can hear you, but not completely clear. I don't know if you...
Yeah, I was off for a while. Am I back on now?
Yes, now it's better.
Good. Yeah. So we work with the industry to help verify and demonstrate sustainable production. And we do that by using data from satellites and the ground. So we work with major growers and traders such as Gar, Wilmar, Bundu, but also with consumer good brands, Mondelez, Unilever, IKEA, and others, as well as investors and asset managers. Professor Patrese mentioned the misinformation around palm oil production, and I want to have a look at that. We all know that the European Commission has approved a new law for imports of deforestation-free commodities, and the EC asked the European public, okay, what do you think is the most notorious crop that should definitely be monitored? And then 80% of the public said, yeah, palm oil, that should definitely be monitored and part of the European law. But far few people said, yeah, paper or coffee. It is not so much known. So when we're discussing about reputation, this is very interesting because what is the reality that we see from the science? At first, we see that the actual deforestation around the world, there's other commodities like cattle and soy that are very significant. The big circle means a lot of deforestation, a large number. The small circle for palm actually means, in comparison, the impact is much smaller. And then also, very importantly, we know that the number of companies that make commitments to improve the situation are also much higher than from the cattle and other commodities. So yeah, what can we really say about these commitments in the palm industry if we monitor that using satellites? So it's a challenge. We have computer software to interpret all the satellite images we get around the world, scanning every 10 meters of the Earth's soil every day, but to combine that with the information on where are the plantations, the farms, where's the palm growing, how is that relating to the mills and the refineries and the factories of each company in the supply chain. So this is what it looks like. We have the satellites, and then the software says, okay, these pixels, they are very dark green. They are the high biodiversity forest, and the light green is forest that has been more impacted by the humans. We can also see which pixels are here in yellow, the palm, where is it growing? Professor Meijert already mentioned the distribution of where everything is grown. We need to know that. So we get that from the satellites, as well as the deforestation. Where is that happening? And then we need to put that in the context of the supply chains of the producers. So the buyers also know where they're buying from. Which you see the black lines here are, for example, is it palm oil, or is it like pulp and paper, or cocoa, or coffee? What is the ownership on it? So when we run the analysis of 22 years of satellite data to see what is the palm oil driven deforestation, we have seen that in 2015, many companies, producers made the commitment saying, we are going to make an effort to stop deforestation. And you can see here, 2015 was in Indonesia, a lot of deforestation. The bar is very high. Why? Because there were huge numbers of fires that caused haze everywhere. Many people will remember the Amazon, huge fires. So, but we can see that after, the bars get much smaller. And in fact, if we run the data for 2022, we see that it is as low almost as in the past 22 years. So that's a marked decrease in the palm-driven deforestation since the industry really made big commitments. And that's very interesting. We see this trend go down. But at the same time, if we look at the prices in the same period, we have seen that they are only going up. And especially until May, even through the roof. But does that also mean that now the deforestation is increasing? Well, our data shows that is not the case. If we look at this year, every month, we can compare what this year's deforestation, how it's looking like, the monthly average of the deforestation for the past years, like 2019, 2020, we see that the bars are much lower. Apart from March, there was more deforestation, but in the total and on average, there's a lot less deforestation this year, even with these high prices. Well, how can that be? It is not slowing down because the production demand volume is decreasing. There's also was an economic drop due to Corona, but it's also not the case. And importantly, it's also not because there's hardly any forest left. No, there's actually 20% to 70% in green regions like Papua, where there's still a lot of forest in the concessions. For Malaysia, I don't show it here because of the time, but there's exactly the same trend of decreasing deforestation due to palm. Even with the smallholders, but I can go into that later. So I think the main thing here is that the palm oil industry has a bad reputation in the media, but I think that recognition for achievements is due because the monitoring and the commitments made and the performance can be an example for all these other oil crops and other commodities that now are the target of this EU regulation. Well, that's a positive story, but of course there's also something left to be desired with the new EU regulation coming up. Deforestation is still continuing, but thanks to the satellite data, we can now pinpoint the hotspots of where this deforestation is happening and which companies are operating there, which suppliers are there, and who is buying from these regions. So that is what you can see in these red areas here, zooming into entire Indonesia. So in these red regions, we see some increase. So if we would go to Papua, for example, we can see that the green line is there's still a lot of forest inside the palm oil concession. Concessions are, say, the areas of production that are not yet that are converted or not yet to palm. In this case, not yet, 72% still in forested situation. But in 2022, we can see here, there's an increase. So we have to watch those areas. And the certainty for the palm oil sector is that we can do that now, and we can show that to the buyers, we can show that to investors, we can show that to the consumers. And because we have these concession boundaries, those are the black lines that you can see here. So we know who owns this plantation. We can see that in the red, recently they started clearing the dark green, and the dark green is very intact, high biodiverse forest. So this is a risk to everyone buying from this specific company over here. We can see the same here with the peatlands. Peat is carbon in the soil, which if it is disturbed, it will release a lot of carbon emissions, which is bad for the climate. So my message being that actually the reputation of the sector should be much better. It can be an example for many other sectors, especially with the EU law. And that now, as an industry, we do have the tools. I know that many of our clients are a bit worried about this EU law, about the implications, but I want to reassure that the tools are there, so we can make a good effort, every one of us, to work on the compliance with this EU regulation. And I think that's almost exactly 10 minutes, so I would like to stop here.
Even geduld.
Grazie, Niels. Thank you, Niels. Very interesting. First thing first, because if you introduced the theme of communication that should improve this bad reputation, starting from data, and thank you for explaining that sustainability is very much conditioned by technology. So thinking that you can achieve sustainability by simply reducing activities is a utopia. You can achieve sustainability if you use technology to somehow improve our balance with the environment. And satellites are some of the innovations we need for monitoring. And we know, scientists know, but luckily also politicians know. As a matter of fact, we know that there is a European regulation that imposes or will impose satellite monitoring. And this is to ensure corporate compliance so that they realize that we cannot afford deforestation, considering what has been done over the last few years, and the fact that the situation has improved is also probably due to the fact that the focus of the whole world on palm oil has entailed investments in the right direction. But talking about regulations and how the future markets will be regulated, now we have Davide Pettenella, who's a scientist, but on my side he deals with politics and economics, and he works at the Facoltà di Agraria of Università degli Studi di Padova. He's coordinated a working group at the ministry, and he's been chair of the forest stewardship for Italy. And this is the mark on sustainable forestry products. So he has less than 10 minutes. Over to you, Davide, to tell us something about the current situation and what we should expect from corporates in the future for those who have a palm oil-based supply chain. Thank you so much. Can you see the presentation properly? Yes, we can. Okay, great. I will give a short presentation of the new regulations on deforestation-free products using the findings of the research that I'm conducting with a number of collaborators from our department, Andreghetto and Masiero, and from the University of Padua spin-off, Elena Massaretti. Professor, we cannot hear you, says Maria Vincenza Kiriakou. Apologies. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear the professor now. Oh, apologies, and thank you so much. So, like I said, my presentation results from the work of the group that includes my colleagues, Andreghetto and Masiero, and colleagues of the spin-off of the university, including Elena Massaretti. There are 3 sections in my presentation: some background, and then the contents of these deforestation regulation from the EU, and to conclude, some open issues. Now, the role of the European Union is significant when it comes to importing raw materials that cause deforestation. It has been estimated at around 16%. This is the deforestation due to the imports of these raw materials, food and non-food included. This role has been fundamental in the past. It's waning. China is one of the main contributors to these problems, but worldwide, the European Union has severe responsibilities, and they are connected to a number of raw materials, but there's a certain concentration. 90% of deforestation caused by the imports by the 27 countries of the European Union is connected to 10 commodities, and 60% is connected to soybean, palm oil, and leather and cattle meat. And Italy has a fairly significant role with respect to this. And this role, in particular, is connected to the imports of wood products. You know that we are the main country for this, and then fresh cattle meat, soybean, coffee, cocoa, and palm oil. We are amongst the top 3 countries responsible for these phenomena. For this region, the European Union has made important initiatives as part of the general strategy of the Green Deal. It has promoted a number of sectoral plans and specific actions. And specifically, as regards the problem of third world countries, the deforestation, we have the strategy document, which is the European Union Forestry Strategy document, and we have a specific document analyzing the problems relating to the dependency of the European Union from third world countries. And finally, we have the EU regulation for deforestation, zero deforestation. So let's move on to take a look at the contents of this EUDR, taking account of the fact that it is part of a number of actions that the European Union is promoting for the forestry sector. The proposed regulation, the initial proposal made by the Commission, dates back to the month of November 2021, and quite obviously the goal is that of minimizing deforestation and achieve zero imports of products that cause deforestation and forestry decay. Initially, the European Commission proposed to work only on 6 products: meat, cocoa, coffee, palm oil, soybean, wood, and byproducts of raw wood. And how does the EU operate with this regulation? Well, it requires that these commodities, these important products, have a system of control of legality, and that they are legally documented as being products coming from third world countries that respect the regulations on sustainability in the use of land, and that they have a system of due diligence / traceability, allowing for the traceability of the product from the forest or from the field through to the final consumer. It establishes 2 categories of economic subjects / operators that have different responsibilities. First, the so-called operators and the traders. The traders are, commercial operators. So operators are those that introduce for the first time in the European Union the products that come from external areas or non-EU areas. And these operators, just like the traders, if they are SMEs, they are under the obligation of due diligence. Instead, those who only act as intermediaries have the obligation to retain the documentation on the traceability of the products. So, those who have this system of due diligence have to retain the documents on the legal origin of the products, which is not connected to deforestation and forest degradation caused by the products. And they also have to carry out a risk analysis for the country from which they import these commodities. So traceability and due diligence. These are the 2 main tools for implementing the regulation, and the regulation has not yet been finally approved. It has gone through several stages, so there's been the proposal of the Commission, this has been evaluated by the Council for the Environment, and recently it was evaluated by the European Parliament, which has given some suggestions for changing the regulation itself, and we are waiting for the final decision from the trilogy in some months. So we're gonna have the regulation up and running probably next year. So which are the modifications made or suggested by the Parliament to the original version? Well, the Parliament suggested to consider more themes, including the respect of the rights of the indigenous populations and the rights of use of the land by the local community. And very importantly, they proposed to broaden to many more products the initial implementation, not just cattle meat, but other types of meat. It has broadened the scope to palm oil byproducts. It has added new products like maize and other specific products that were not included before as forestry products like rubber, charcoal, and printed paper, and so on. So, conclusions. I want to remind you that these interventions, regulatory interventions, pose big open questions or issues. Some are new and arise from the implementation of this regulation that is related most especially to the action of the European Union and of other Western countries. Similar regulations have been approved or are about to be approved by the USA, Japan, Australia, and other Western countries. So, according to me, there are three fairly important open questions or issues. So, this regulation imposes a mandatory procedure, and this procedure has a lot of bureaucracy. And, multinational companies and big business that are well organized and have a good ESG profile will find it easy to deal with this bureaucracy. But quite obviously, it's more difficult for the SMEs, in particular those that produce in third world countries. And there is a risk that of creating a dualistic or dual market, an international market where certified and documented sustainable raw materials are put into the market from Western countries, and then there is an opposite market that may be bigger quantity-wise, that involves China and India with unqualified or non-qualified products. And the last open issue is the interactions that may arise between the instruments that have been there for a long time, and they've been added by NGOs and the civil society to certify and document the sustainable origin of these products on the one hand, and this regulation that certifies the quality of products. We have to bear this problem in mind. So the certification of legality and sustainability, we have to bear in mind previous investments, and also we have to bear in mind the fact that voluntary bottom-up initiatives from the civil society have been replaced by mandatory and bureaucratic procedures, which are top-down procedures. What really matters is the avenue we have to pursue. We all agree that we have to go for a qualification and control of internationally traded raw materials, and the problem is which are the best tools, the most adequate tools to be used. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Davide, one question. Since you have a privileged observatory and you have a privileged view, we have seen how the countries are reacting. What about the corporates? How do you expect them to react to these new constraints? Are you optimistic on the fact that that will be somehow accepted and considered to be a step forward, or will corporates see this as an added cost and complexity? Well, it's so difficult to say. Economists have systematically been wrong with their forecasts over the last decades in every field of the economy. So I will not dare give you an answer, but like I said before, big business, large enterprises already have a good traceability system in-house. they are not so naive as not to control and check their suppliers, because they have to maintain their reputation, their value in the Western market. The problem is with SMEs, both importers in the EU and producers. We don't want to have a specialization. The previous speaker made a difference between large concessionaires and small holders. So we wouldn't fix the problem. We in the Western world would think we have fixed the problem by importing controlled products coming from big business, from big European and Italian enterprises in the sector, and leaving the international trade and market to develop without control in order to supply Chinese and Indian consumers and consumers of other emerging countries. But that's a risk that we are faced with, and that Hellas entails an ability in terms of international coordination and dialogue in the proper international venues. But instead, we are seeing that international solidarity and this ability to have a common vision has been undermined by recent events that we all know so well. Thank you, Davide. So before closing, we will close on the dot at 12, but there are questions in the chat box, and I think that two are mainly for Nils. I'm seeing one from Picasso, who talks about having more data on the topic of deforestation. Maybe Neil, you can simply tell us what is the paper in which this person can find this information. And then there's one more question about this bizarre connection between deforestation and price increase, but we've already answered. So Niels, can you please simply suggest where we can get more details?
Yes, of course, we'll make available the presentation after this nice event. And also you can reach out directly to us at team@satellians.com. We also have data on Malaysia that we didn't have time to show today, but also other areas around the world. So we'd be happy to interact.
Okay, thank you. Your presentation has raised questions. We are happy for that. And then there is one more question on satellite data. And so we know who's the person who has to answer. It's from Marcello Valenti. Which are the requests in terms of satellite control provided for under the European regulation? No, it's for Pettenella. Well, I think that it's for both. It's for both. For now, the European Union has taken a very significant initiative, i.e. to create a Center for Studies, Research and Monitoring, including satellite monitoring at the Joint Research Center of ISPRA. It's already monitoring the sector and collecting satellite data. It's already reviewing in a more analytical manner the estimates that I've already very briefly presented to you about incorporated deforestation. We have an authoritative study that we all mentioned, that by Penderella, and Letizia Buges mentioned it. It's the reference study, but more precise analyses are about to be published. And in any case, quite obviously, when we make these analyses, we don't include certified, RSPO certified raw materials, like in the case of soybean and biomasses for making energy and sugar cane and so on and so forth. In this case, the estimates are based upon non-certified raw materials relating to countries in which deforestation is quantified, and this quantification is made through satellite data. Okay, one last question. This is about nutrition. Is it possible to better understand if and to what extent the consumption of palm oil based products can have an impact on the concentration of palmitic acid in our body, and if and when this can entail an increase in the risks for health? So this is a fairly technical question. I imagine that we have to ask Sebastiano. Well, regardless of the source, the palmitic acid that we ingest does not modify the levels of palmitic acid in our body, and that's for two reasons. One, because the intake is so little as compared to what we have in our body, so there is a dilution. And two, palmitic acid maintains a concentration in tissues, and this is steady and controlled. So an excess would be immediately metabolized with a different fatty acid, like oleic acid, so it would be transformed. As regards palm oil, the quantities in Italy that we ingest are so low, and the main source of palmitic acid in our diet in Italy is first of all dairy products, and second olive oil, because olive oil contains palmitic acid. And so, considering the high consumption of olive oil in Italy, this is the second source of palmitic acid. I don't know if I answered. Yes, you have answered. So we can have peace of mind. Palm oil is not bad for health. Saying so is not science-based. If we abolish palm oil from our diet, nothing would change. That's interesting. In order to understand why palm oil is being seen as the devil, but that's for tomorrow afternoon. We have an important round table. It's part of the ASviS program, so we'll dig deeper into marketing and behavior of consumers and communication. With that, we're done. We can now conclude. The summary I would make is that, well, as usual, situations are way more complex than we would like to have. We cannot give simple solutions to complex situations, but you know, at times in some situations there is a boomerang effect and things can worsen, like with sunflower seed oil. The situation was already difficult, it's worse. We are never ready enough for all of the trade-offs when we want to have food for all, high quality, and without destroying our planet. The second important consideration is that we have to study. We cannot affording to not have a rigorous scientific base for drawing conclusions. More often than not, we rely upon scientifically unconfirmed data, and even worse, we make political decisions based upon those positions. So it's up to us to steadily remind policymakers that science helps them make decisions. Science doesn't give the answer. We've seen that many situations are controversial, so political decisions should be based upon data and evidence, not simply upon ideologies, attitudes, and opinions. And the third important thing is that in acting, the role of innovation is very important. I'm not just talking about technological innovation, but also regulatory innovation. So if we want to achieve a result, we have to change the way in which we produce, consume, and distribute. And this change at times is difficult because, as always, it should counter the resistance of corporates, people, and communities. And so innovation for sustainability is the real challenge. And then I would close with one last point that we will discuss tomorrow. Once we have evidence, once we have certainties, once we have actions, we have to be able to communicate them, because the risk is that people don't understand why certain rules have been approved, why certain solutions have been adopted, because no one has been able to explain them. Unfortunately, when things are complex, we need the expert of communication to give simple explanations. This is innovation and this requires investment. So hopefully initiatives like today's initiative can be useful to help people understand these topics. We've had several people who've stayed with us live, but no worries, the webinar has been recorded, so it's going to be possible to have access to it also in the future, to this important information, and you can read the papers of the scientists who you've met today. So I'd like to invite here with me on the virtual floor Mr. Fontana, Dr. Fontana. So you have 2 minutes to close if you want to add something. I have nothing to add, rather congrats for the excellent coordination and the excellent additions you've made. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because our speakers have delivered excellent and clear presentations, but you managed to add interesting things thereon and so clearly for the audience. I'd like to thank the speakers for the excellent presentations and all of the participants. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 3 p.m. with the second webinar talking about certification, which is of paramount importance, and communication. Thank you all.